My name is JP Baudet with the Washington Kurdish Institute, and we have Soran Hamarash on today, the author of The Lost and Untold History of the Kurds, Rediscovering the Beginning of the Western Civilization and the Origin of the Indo-European Languages. It's a very important book that completely upends our understanding of kind of the path that linguistic history and cultural history has taken in order to get to where we are today. Soran has studied a lot about kind of the Kurdish influence on modern culture, and we're really looking forward to hearing a little bit more about things that aren't being said that he's uncovered, and kind of where we should go next in terms of our investigation. So thank you so much, Soran, for coming on.
Thank you, Jean-Philippe. It's a pleasure meeting you. I'm sure you'll have a nice chat today.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Soran, if you wouldn't mind, I think it'd be great to kind of start with broad strokes, in terms of your academic argument. If you want to kind of expand on what you studied, what you found, and kind of what the main gist of your book is, I think that'd be really, really great.
Well, history of the Kurds have been written by outsiders. I mean, obviously that's not entirely negative, but what I mean, Kurds has not written their history properly until now. So what you see currently in academia, Kurds are stereotyped. So the view about the Kurds is not based on evidence, on academic evidence. It's rather stereotyping. For example, if you look at the Britannica, one of the biggest encyclopedia in the world, if you read it as we are talking now, so it introduced the Kurds as being nomad. They were nomad until 20th century. So they were herders on these mountains until thanks to the borders by colonial powers, and that forced the Kurds to have a settled life and start agriculture. So prior to 20th century, according to general academia, Kurds were nomad on these mountains. So this is the current view about the Kurds. But when you look at the evidence, you see entirely different people. I mean, we have books written like 1,200 years ago that introduce Kurds entirely different. So this is the story. I was a young man, and I looked for myself before I looked for the Kurds, because I had a parallel life. At home, we were Kurds. My father told me we are Kurds and we should stay Kurds, but he didn't give me more. So when I was going to school, when we're reading in history books, we didn't exist. So there were two worlds. In a world, I didn't exist, the world of history books, and at home we exist. So this contradiction made me like read from an early age, and to start understanding why this happens. So that was the journey of understanding the Kurds. So from early age, I started reading history, but gradually, after I traveled to Europe, I settled there. I accessed through English language. I accessed latest and more advanced researches about the Kurds, and gradually I was obtaining more understanding about the Kurds. At the same time, it was becoming more complex, because the views about the Kurds didn't make sense. So to understand the root of that, for years I kept reading and reading and reading, until about 15 years ago, I noticed that there are names and words in ancient texts were Kurdish. So, for example, a king of Manayan. Manayan ruled in part of Kurdistan, mainly East Kurdistan, around 3,000 years ago. So name of the king was Aza. Aza in Kurdish means brave. But I'm not that type of people who jumps to conclusion. I looked more and I found another word. For example, Wasta Reber in Kurdish means formal leader. And that word was translated via Assyrian language at the time. So in English, it was translated as foreman as well. So Wasta Reber after 3,000 years ago and Aza after so that changed my understanding about language, about history of languages. So that was the beginning and the start of the journey of studying ancient languages. So I studied Sumerian, Hurrian, Hittite, Luvian, Avestan. There are other languages, less known languages, just to understand what happened. So I'm a historian, but I use every tool. I'm a musician as well. So music, language, everything helps me to understand, and I use all these tools to help me to understand the Kurd. So understanding the Kurd requires open. If you follow the conventional method, you won't understand it. For example, let me tell you one thing. Spitting happens in Kurdish culture. And I remember seeing my father spitting, but he always stamped on it. You know, it was like immediately. I didn't know why. And I read now, it's a Sumerian custom. You're never allowed to spit without stamping on it. So my father was doing it unconsciously. So even the bread, you know, the kneading of the bread, the word for barley, for these words, agricultural words. After 5,000 years, we speak at the moment, when I speak Kurdish at home, sometimes 60% of the words are found in Sumerian, few found in Hittite, Median language. We don't have like much details as much as Sumerian language, but we still have a reasonable number of words which can tell us aspect of grammar, and especially horse-related vocabularies. So they are entirely Kurdish. So this journey of language helped me to have deeper understanding. And the method I was following, I didn't focus on understanding the Kurd. For me, history of humanity is connected in every way. So to understand the Kurd, I studied ancient religion. And for example, even English people, French people, I wanted to understand them because humanity somehow is connected. For example, there was a prophet called Mani. This prophet, prior to Islam, he was well known around the world. His religion was spread to, he started from a city. His fathers and mother from Hamadan. Those days were part of Kurdish territory. He came from that family. His religion spread from China to Europe. So he was so influential. And so what I mean, we are connected in every way. We didn't appreciate this connection. So that's why I didn't focus on understanding the Kurd. So because I studied all these different religion and nationalities, that helped me to see the Kurd within the bigger picture of the history of the Middle East and history of Europe as well. Because Middle East and Europe is very much connected, is not visible. But when you dig deeper, you understand how word travels. For example, Sumerian word like gri. Gri in Sumerian means cry. In Kurdish, exactly, gri means cry, and it changed in English becomes cry. And in Old French, gridare, something like that. I can't remember all these words. And you can find in Italian in different forms, slightly the meaning changes. That's understandable for linguists. Word, when spread around the world, it like loses part of its meaning, but remain within the same circle of languages. So this is the story of how I started understanding the Kurds.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, very in-depth kind of investigation, clearly. And we're glad you did. Soran, real quick, are you from Kurdistan? You mentioned kind of growing up in a Kurdish household. Is there a specific portion that you kind of spent most of your time or went to school? And kind of how did that influence where you're at now compared to perhaps another location within Kurdistan, or if you had been, say, if you'd grown up in Turkey versus Iraq, how would that have kind of changed some of the evidence or available material that you ultimately worked with?
Well, I grew up in South Kurdistan from the city called Slemani. It's reasonably large city. So we studied in Kurdish language during childhood. I'm coming from a family. My grandfather was a poet, a well-known poet. He was a fighter for the right of women, oppressed people, and the Kurds. So he influenced me a lot. His view, I've never seen him, but when I was young, my mother used to help me recite his poems, and I used to read it in school. So his view influenced me a lot. But because I grew up in Kurdistan, South Kurdistan, I learned Arabic. I think learning Arabic helped me to access Islamic sources, like primary sources, because you're required to study the Kurdish history. Accessing primary sources is quite important, because the books written in 20th century, when you read it about the Kurd, you have to be careful, because there are so much academic world, so much politicized. So you can see that. So accessing the primary source was quite important. So maybe that helped me. A researcher from North Kurdistan might not speak Arabic, so that restricts his attempt to access Arabic sources, because most of the books written during Islamic period were written in Arabic, and as well as Kurdish sources as well, because we have very rich literature, especially religious literature, Kurdish. We have a religion called Yaristan, and Yazidis, particularly Yaristan, they've left a lot of kalam. They call the kalam body of saying. These are sacred words. So accessing these sometime, for example, among the kalam of Yaristan, they mentioned a name of God called Zirwan. Zirwan was a god. Exact god was mentioned by the Medes. Exact God was mentioned by the Mitannis. So we are from every aspect, Kurds are continuation of the past. So coming back to your question, so accessing these sources helped me to do that. But I think dedication, it was a personal issue I took on, and it was so difficult. There were days which I thought I give it up, because I couldn't get to any result, because after a couple of 100 years ago, challenging the established view is not easy. For example, Sumerian language is currently considered an isolated language. A language died out 4,000 years ago. Now, I challenged that completely. I said, no, it didn't die. And it's not isolated language. It's connected to English, French, and others. And I show evidence. So everything I say in this book is supported by evidence. And I'm not translator of ancient languages. And I consider myself lucky. I don't claim to be translator of any word or any text. All I do, I access these dictionaries and lexicons of ancient languages, and I show you, for example, gal hur. That's gal mean groin. hur means scratch. That's Sumerian. At home, we say galur means scratch groin. So it hasn't changed after 5. So no one can challenge that. The reason they can't challenge it is because they have to challenge the best known dictionaries about the Sumerian language. So the issue is not with me. They have to take the issue with the top academic institutions and top dictionaries and authorities of the field.
Gotcha. But I'm sure that, you mentioned that people are kind of pushing back a little bit. Have you found that when you get some pushback based on your research, that it's kind of limited or like very narrowly focused? And if you do get kind of any criticism or any questions about kind of how the connection that you're drawing here works, what's the best way to kind of move beyond that and say, your criticism doesn't make any sense. You just laid out very clearly some like really good examples of kind of the continuity of this language. How does kind of your interaction with the intellectual market around this concept, how does that look? I mean, has that been something that you've been frustrated with? Is it something that you've gotten a lot of support for as an academic?
Well, to be honest, I haven't had a proper academic opposition yet. But I sent the book to a professor in America. I can't give his name for confidentiality. If initially, when he saw the title of, he didn't know me prior to the book. When I sent him the email, he said, "Soran, I find the title, little bit." He wasn't quite sure about the title because it is too courageous. I mean, when you say rediscovering the origin of Western civilization, I told them everything said in this book is based on evidence. I sent him the book. After a couple of weeks, he came back to me. He said, "Soran, I'll review your book, and the review will be published this year in a top journal in America." In the field, others currently reading it. So when you oppose the entire academia, it's not easy. The journey is not easy. Have you heard of Schopenhauer? Schopenhauer was a philosopher. I'm sure you've heard of him. Well, once he said, when someone bring new reality or new truth or inventions, initially you will be ridiculed initially. And people, the second stage, so the first stage is ridiculing you, the second stage is opposing you, the third stage is accepting you. So I'm not quite sure which stage I am at the moment, but that's the stage of new way of seeing the world. Don't forget, mindset is like religion. Mindset is purely like religion. There are people, when they see the video immediately without looking at evidence or without trying to see the evidence. On Twitter, for example, I remember a girl, when she saw some of my text about the book, she said, "Well, this claim is entirely false. I speak Kurdish. I studied Sumerian as well." I told her, "Okay, just see that 3-minute video and tell me if there's anything said here is unscientific linguistically." She immediately came back to me and she said, you can find that on the Twitter, when she said, "I'll buy your book and I'll follow you." So it takes time. It's not an easy journey. I thought, because of social media and the world more connected than like 100 years ago, But still, changing the mindset is not easy. As I said, mindset is like religion. People, they like the comfort of, conventional understanding of the world. For example, I always look at Roman Empire. Roman Empire, the empire ended and disappeared, but they didn't disappear entirely. If you look at, I'm sure you speak French and English, Jean-Philippe, yeah?
I do.
So if you look at your language, sometimes English 30% is Latin, French similarly, and Spanish, there are variation of the percentage of Latin word, but you can find Latin and the Roman Empire in every European country and every European languages. So empires and civilization disappear, but their legacy will remain. That's logic, and that's logic of life. Now, every Sumerian invented the first writing. Everything, whether you are in a church, in a synagogue, or in a mosque, part of what you believe is Sumerian. For example, the story of Noah, the story of Adam, these are Sumerian stories. So now, academic decided that this language is isolated and is not connected to any language. This is entirely, logically is wrong. Logically is wrong. And evidence shows that the language is connected to European language. Part of the reason for this lack of understanding is during 18th centuries, European were those days nationalist. So they were trying to find a glorified past for themselves. So they invented this Aryan theory. I call it Aryan mythical theory. So this theory, when it was invented, by 20th century, this theory was properly established. So Sumerian humanity started knowing Sumerian from 20th century. So the frame of that theory was strongly established. Sumerian language and culture couldn't fit into that mythical theory. So due to that, Sumerian until today is considered an isolated language. And this is, as I explained, in comparing it to Roman civilization. If you compare Sumerian to Roman civilization, Sumerian were much more advanced for their time. Yet they tell us the language disappeared and is unconnected to any language. So I'm challenging all that. I'm challenging not just that. I'm challenging almost everything about ancient history. Because, for example, Kurds, look at this logic. Suddenly a nation appears during Middle Ages. But now I show books that Kurds, like 1200 years ago, claim that the origin of civilization was written in Kurdish language. And these books were translated to English a couple of hundred years ago. But because of this mindset, no one tried to use these evidence to understand the Kurds. So here's my book, trying to rewrite the history of the Kurd, a history which is based on evidence. But because the Kurds are ancient people, and because they live on a land, they call it Zagros, and historian and archaeologists agree that Zagros is the birth of beginning of writing and agricultural revolution. So these two milestones are quite important for humanity. But Kurds are studied in isolation from these evidence. So they just came from, according to their understanding, they just suddenly disappears during Middle Ages. I show evidence that thousands of evidence that everything is connected linguistically, historically.
Mm. And I think that's so important to, I mean, the Kurdish people have struggled for centuries with kind of being acknowledged as a separate identity. And so I think your work showing that this identity is thousands of years old and there's no reason to ignore it, so important to kind of being able to move forward and in a productive way. Um, if if there was a kind of a next step for this kind of research project, I mean, you've traced a little bit of kind of this agricultural and literary and linguistic history. What do you think the next step might be in terms of incorporating this and making sure that this is, I mean, is the next step all, are we jumping all the way to rewriting history books if it was up to you? Or is there something smaller that maybe you had your eyes set on, where kind of like, for instance, you've brought up that Sumerian is considered an isolated language. And I think you've given some excellent examples of why that doesn't make any sense at all. Is that kind of the first step, changing that interpretation of Sumerian? Or what is your hope for how your research is going to kind of change the situation in the field?
Let's go back to First World War. After First World War, the colonial powers were informed by their institutions. Mm-hmm. And these institutions lacked a deep understanding of the Middle East, because they were accessing mainly the Greek historiography and knowledge obtained from Bible. So the two main sources for understanding the Middle East were Bible and Greek historiography. And these two is imbalanced. It doesn't tell us the entire history of the region. So Kurds in that unbalanced history didn't exist. So when they drew the map, because they were informed by institutions, they drew the map. Kurds were not acknowledged. We have to always understand that policymakers and those who make decisions, they consult historians, and history is part of that. So when they came to Middle East, these colonial powers, they had a very, very poor understanding of the Kurd. So their policy and politics was based on that. Now, this book is, I'm not waiting for history to be written. When I wrote history of the Kurd, I had to rewrite history. The reason is, you can't write history of the Kurd without challenging many established wrong view about the Middle East. For example, the Medes. The Medes are one of the greatest empire of the history. They influence, according to the Greek people, they influenced the Persian culturally, and the Persian were so much admire the Medes. Greek says, they say that even though Persian lived in the lower land and on plain land, which was warm, but they still wore the cloth of the Median, which was more suited for the mountain region, because they saw their cloth as being, for higher classes. Now, Medes are called Medes, but Persian, now Medes disappeared. According to current history, Medes disappeared and Persian are Persian. Now, one of the problem here, the rulers of the Persian called Achaemenid, and the nation was Persian. Now, the Medes is only Mede. That doesn't make sense. In the matter of fact, the Medes were called Median Kurds. And there are many, many evidence I showed in this book. So there are I had to change all that. I tell the world, no, the Medes were not nation, as the current academia suggests. The Medes were dynasty ruling the Kurds, because the text tells us that. The language tells us that the language was Kurdish, and and the evidence shows us that there are many evidence that shows the Medes were called Kurds prior to Islam. So everything you touch about the Kurds, you have to challenge established views. For example, the current academia, they say Kurds were nomads until 800-900 years ago. Kurds were nomads, but now I have the Kurds wrote their history during 9th century. There's a polymath called Al-Dinawari. This man was the greatest scientist in the history. He was mathematician, agriculturalist, linguist, historian, and and he specialized in many other fields. This man, one of his books was called The Ancestors of the Kurds. Unfortunately, we have the book in the sources, but it disappeared. When I say disappeared, many sources intentionally destroyed in the Middle East to mislead the people. So the Kurds wrote down their history 1200 years ago. Now, in the academia, they say the Kurds did not know themselves as a distinctive ethnicity until 300-400 years ago. This is today's understanding of the Kurds. For example, they tell you that Sorani dialect was not a written language until 300 years ago. You can see that in Cambridge, in Harvard. Okay. Now I show you poems of Sorani written 900 years ago, and every day new manuscript appears which shows. So everything about Kurdish history is wrong. Now, because Kurds are the beginning, Kurds, this is not from me. Historians agree that they call it the cradle of mankind. Fertile crescent and cradle of mankind. Kurds live on the heart of that area. The story of Abraham, the story of Noah, everything is on the land of the Kurds. But Kurds are studied in isolation from these myths and history. So this book trying to address that. Now, where shall I take it? I think challenging the norm, the mindset is not easy. I'm taking on this journey. The journey just started. There are few projects. Talks are in plan in South Kurdistan and in Europe. The good thing is this book is not just there as a book in a bookshelf. I'm a storyteller. I love talking about these stories. For me, I'm more a storyteller by nature, and a typical Kurd, I always use my hand, and that's quite important. So I can give talks. So the plan is to go everywhere, knock every academic institution, door of any academic institution, and give talks around the world. And the change eventually will happen. I don't know how long is it going to take, but I'm ready for this journey because I'm confident, and this confidence is coming from a deep understanding of the Kurd, of 30 years of hard work. So it's coming from that. So hopefully that will change modern understanding. And once we understand the Kurd, many doors will be open. For example, if modern understanding of Sumerian, current academic understanding that Sumerian died 4,000 years ago. And in this book, I say, no, it didn't die, and it's connected to Indo. Only that bit, which is 1% of my book, that will open thousands of doors for new researchers, and thousands of doors. That is, as I said, 1% of my book. So this book is important. It's history of the Kurd, but it's history of the humanity as well, because through Sumerian we can understand many things. For example, the crescent you see on the mosque.
Yes.
They call it Islamic symbol, but that was a symbol of a Sumerian gods. the star and the crescent. Okay, you can see that star and crescent on the emblem of cities in Europe. In the UK, Portsmouth, on the emblem of the city. In Germany, in Poland, and on Roman coin, on Sassanid coin. So this is how humanity is connected. So the Sumerian symbol currently called Islamic, but it's not Islamic. So everyone can claim it, but the root goes back everything. Anything you for example, Easter and Nowruz, Kurdish year, is not separated. Actually, Europe we're celebrating New Year in April, and that's Sumerian New Year. That is exactly Nowruz. And the mock, April the 1st.
Yes.
That was that culture is coming. The mocking. The mocking is coming from the Sumerian. And Easter, resurrection of Jesus, was the resurrection of a Sumerian god in the New Year. So these things, that we are much more connected than we think. So understanding the Kurds will help us understanding the origin and the root of many current understanding, whether religious, linguistic, and historical. So Kurds are important. We didn't know that, but once you understand the Kurds, it opened the door for many other researchers.
Absolutely. Well, I love the kind of the breakdown that you've given me here. I will absolutely encourage everybody to go out and grab a copy of The Lost and Untold History of the Kurds, Rediscovering the Beginning of the Western Civilization and the Origin of Indo-European Languages. Very academic sounding title, but I'm hearing you talk about this, and this is a very real human, like easy to digest kind of concept. And so I think that everybody should kind of experience that and understand it. If there were any parting kind of wishes that you have for people reading the book, or for maybe academic or institutional kind of positions that are going to investigate the work, obviously, and have their own biases, like you said, they're coming from a position that has wrong information or information that's incomplete. What would be kind of your message there? Just kind of keep an open mind, or what do you think?
Well, first of all, this book is academic, but the way it's written, I didn't use a lot of jargon. It's a simple language I used. So the target is general readers, those who are interested in history overall, ancient history, understanding the ancient history, history of the Middle East, history of the Indo-European languages, understanding the Sumerian, understanding the Hurrian, for example, the Median, the Manayan, and the Sumerian. So all these, it helps even understanding the root of many aspects of religious beliefs. So the way it was written, it targets general reader and academic world as well. But what's differentiate this book from the others? Nothing here written without academic evidence. Everything said, you will see the source of anything raised in this book. So is not message, but I can tell. I asked the world to whether academia or general readers, just be open-minded. Just try to. I know for the last 100 years, they told you Sumerian is a dead language. They told you Kurds are nomad. They told you Medes disappeared. These are all illogical beliefs. It's not based on evidence. So in this book, everything here explained, and many phenomena and many current understanding, whether, as I said, whether you are in a mosque or synagogue or church, you will see part of your belief traced back to the Sumerian. So this book is for general reader, and I hope the reader would not judge by the title. The title, I know, is very, very courageous title, but is everything said in this book, as I said, is based on evidence. As initially, when I sent the book to this professor in America, from the title, he wasn't quite sure whether he promised to review it. He said, "Send the book, Soran, please." So I sent. Once he received it, as I said, he immediately that changed his entire view, and he said, "Soran, I will write a review in a top American journal this year." He said ASAP, but in the language of journal, ASAP mean hopefully 2023. So these things will change the view of, because these people, their reputation is important for them. So when they review a book like that, they reviewed academically, and anything said there, they take responsibility for it. So gradually these things open the door for the world to understand that we by not understanding the Sumerian, by not understanding the Kurd, we lost a lot. As humanity, we lost a lot. It's very important to understand the land of the cradle of civilization. I think we didn't appreciate two milestones of human history: writing and agricultural revolution. Because today, everyone talks about industrial revolution, which is connected to the UK and Europe in general. But another revolution happened, which changed humanity forever. That revolution was agricultural revolution. This agricultural revolution, it was the beginning of civilization, because humanity had to chase food every day. Prior to food surplus, humanity had to chase. So when you chase, you run and run. You can't sit down and create generally. So once they had food surplus through agricultural revolution, humanity started settling. And when they settled and they had food stored, they had the luxury of sitting down and enjoying time. And for example, they had time to listen to music. So that created professionalism as musicians, storytellers. So this is how the civilization of humanity started. And this revolution happened in an area called cradle of mankind and fertile crescent, and which Kurdistan is at the heart of this area. And archaeological evidence shows that domestication of wheat, domestication of all these things happened in Kurdistan. And this was acknowledged in historical evidence. Janfili, there's a very interesting thing in how the myth remain and how these evidence, scientific evidence, how it was acknowledged in the past. Around 2,000 years ago, there's a historian called Strabo. Strabo is a Greek historian. He went to North Kurdistan. When he arrived there, there's an area in the past currently called Jazira. During Greek time, it was called Kurdian. Kurdian means, or Gordian, means land of the Kurd. Now, when he arrived there, he says this is originally the Gordi, son of Triptolemus, settled originally in this area. Gordi, Kurd, son of the Triptolemus. The father of the Kurd was a demigod. In Greek mythology, Triptolemus is a demigod who invented agriculture and civilization. Okay? In that particular area, this is more interesting. In that particular area where Strabo tells this story and is connected to the mythology of the Greek, precisely in that area, in the vicinity of that area, there's an area called Karajadak. In that area, a team of archaeologists found wheat, a type of wheat. And the archaeologists suggest that this is probably the people of this area were the earliest who domesticated this type of wheat. You see? So this is archaeology. Work of historian this is the work of historian, to connect these evidence. This is mythology, Greek mythology. It remained. People knew that they domesticated agriculture, and Greek recorded it, but it's supported by them. More evidence from that area. There's a man called Al-Jaziri. Al-Jaziri was a water engineer, so he was specialized in water and agriculture and that type of world. Al-Jaziri lived around 800 years ago. He's precisely from that area. Precisely from that area. He was so great, according to Britannica. Leonardo da Vinci was influenced by his design, his water design. So these things remain, but we didn't acknowledge it. And there is another agriculturalist called Al-Dinawari. Al-Dinawari lived, a Kurdish agriculturalist, an historian, lived during 9th century. His book, Al-Nabat, this book, which was about agriculture, it was the standard in the field for few centuries. So Al-Nabat means the plant. That was the title. So the knowledge of plantation and agriculture and all that remained among the Kurds, and it was acknowledged by the Greek mythology and supported by archaeological. So everything is connected. Everything is there. The job of the historian is linking these various evidence and tell you that we missed, we lost. That's why I say the lost history, because this is a lost history. Unfortunately, we were not aware of it. So as I'm coming back to the two milestones. The other one is writing. Writing started from something we call a clay token. They were, that size, and they represented commodity. Gradually, after 5,000s, these clay tokens changed to cuneiform. Cuneiform was started by the Sumerian. So you can trace the origin of writing to Kurdistan, because these clay tokens gradually, and the wheat which was planted by the Sumerian, the DNA of that wheat can be traced back to mountain of Kurdistan. So everything said here is like that. So when linguistically, genetically, archaeologically, everything is connected. Everything here is connected in this book.
That is amazing, Soran. I am floored. I mean, I studied history in my undergraduate studies.
Really?
And I mean, the kind of the classical perspective on the Mediterranean basin and how history began, is so, some people will say that it has this like definite thing. And we see now, newer historians like yourself are completely upending that. And it's so like when you lay it out, it seems so obvious, right?
Absolutely.
You're literally you have literal loan words from modern Kurdish and ancient Sumerian. So I think this is so wonderful. Everybody, please go buy Soran's book. Mine is in the mail as we speak, so that I can really dive in and get the full look. Soran, I am going to end the recording here, but if you don't mind, I mean, I would love to hear if you have anything more. I would love to chat for another couple minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah, the book is two parts. The first part, I introduce the Kurd. I reintroduce it because the Kurds were not known until this book. That's my understanding. So on the second part, I tell their history. And in the first part, for example, what went wrong with the Kurds' history. And there's a chapter about, very interesting for the world, Kurdish female fighters and their historical route. People think, every phenomena, everything we see now, you can connect it to the past. When you saw ISIS and the Kurds, that ultimate contradiction, women fighting, uncovered hair, and you see women were forced to stay at home. I trace that back to 5,000 years. In terms of law, the Kurdish custom of, not covering head and the custom of covering heads by the ISIS, those people who are linguistically and culturally connected to ISIS, their law says, do not go out without veil. This is Akkadian and Assyrian text clearly says, married women cannot leave home without veil. While the Sumerian, Hurrian, and Median, these people, women never covered, and they for example, they practice business, while women of Akkadian and Assyrian were not allowed to do any business. They were controlled by men. And I traced everything from the Kurds, the female fighters, and you can see female fighting by the Kurds throughout history. You can see, one of the phenomena of Kurdish culture. There are people in one villages in Kurdistan, for example, 50 men counted in one village holding their mother name instead of fathers.
Oh,
so, and I have evidence a Kurdish prince used his mother's name 1,000 years ago. And you can see that, for example, 200 years ago, you can see that throughout history. There are important figures in Kurdistan, and nobody knew that the name they use is their mother's name. So it's so common among the Kurds. So women had power in Kurdish society during the last 100 years, because the assimilation attempts by the Iranian, Iraqi, and Turkish and Syrian government to assimilate the Kurd, they changed part of that culture. But when you go back to the history, you will see how, for example, women fighters were existed among the Medes, existed among the Adiabinian, and even Saladin, who people don't know, unfortunately, and until now, they say he is from a Kurdish origin, but his state was called Kurdish state during their rule, was called, and their women, they built 30%, 1/3 of all the building schools in Syria was built by Ayyubid women, because they had influence and power. So women power existed in every aspect of life of the Kurds, whether people of power or the general people. So there's a man, a British man, British are usually conservative.
Yeah.
And so when he visits, he visits Kurdistan and said, this occurs and occurs and occurs every day. I see Kurdish women taking a bath by the river, and they look at me naked without caring about me. A stranger passing by, for him it was strange for him. And again, they talk about women fighters, how they fought the British, and how they were fighters by nature. So you can see that throughout everything in Kurdish culture. You can trace it back to that root. So in this book, there's a chapter about that woman. There's a chapter about, for example, Nowruz connected to Easter and all that. So everything is not the typical historical book, which is full of, is connected today in every aspect. So it gives more meaning to life, basically.
Yeah, I mean, and the way that you're kind of describing what you've written and some of the parts of the book that you've shared, it does really speak to that richness. And kind of the point of the book, it seems, is not just for somebody in a university somewhere to like have some very, new but narrow thing that they understand. The point is it seems to really enrich our lives and to be able to kind of understand these connections and appreciate them much more.
Absolutely. So. Absolutely. I critically looked at how history is written, because I believe that the current method we isolate. We just, for example, take Assyrian, we study them, but generally we don't acknowledge how the pre-Assyrian affected Assyrian, how pre-Sumerian affected Sumerian, and how Sumerian affected the civilization after. Currently, I've written in this book that the current historiography doesn't reflect the nature of human society. The current history doesn't. I think we are much more connected than we thought. Much more connected.
What a beautiful idea to end on. So, Soran, thank you so much for coming, sharing all this information. My mind is so open right now. I'm so excited to kind of dive in and see the nitty-gritty and line by line kind of learn more. But as mentioned, everybody, please pop out, grab the Lost and Untold History of the Kurds. You will learn a new thing, not only about Kurdish culture and Kurdish history, but your history. This is the history of humankind. As you said, this is
absolutely
from the Fertile Crescent. This is everyone's history. So wonderful.